Hi there, Chris Cunniffe here with Lucid Coaching. I've just started a new blog and I thought I would kick things off by doing a video blog to accompany the written format, as I know it's easier sometimes just to take in a short video on your phone. I entitled my first blog post, The Cat Mama. That's a reference to me. We'll get into that in a minute. And his telepathic reality straddling cat. Now, that's a reference to our cat Shadow. And the basis of the blog post is the fact that I've had a lot of interesting experiences both in the wake state and in the dream state with our cat. Um, the phrase cat mama, it actually comes from a teasing nickname that my wife has given me. And I've got a close relationship with our cat. And I've always sort of had an interesting relationship with cats going back to when I was a kid, and sometimes she'll call me the cat whisperer, but Cat Mama is her favorite teasing name for me. So I adopted our cat Shadow back in 2001. I was single at the time, and I actually adopted two kittens, Shadow and his brother Tigger. Tigger transitioned in 2011. So I'm going to focus this post on Shadow because I didn't start really recording my dreams until after Tigger had passed, and I've had a lot of interesting dreams that involve Shadow. Although Tigger sometimes appears in a dream as well, now that he's transitioned, and I've had several lucid dreams that have been triggered by the fact that I see Tigger in the dream state. And it's a way sort of to serve me as a lucidity cue, letting me know that I might be dreaming, and I'm able to transform an ordinary dream, into a lucid one. So getting back to Shadow, like most pet owners, we deal with the problem that Shadow is very nocturnal. And this can, cause problems when you're trying to get a good night's sleep. And so I started to have some interesting dream experiences because Shadow would be locked in the garage, and we would do that sometimes just to prevent him from waking us up in the middle of the night. But I started to notice that Shadow was making appearances in my dreams, almost as if he was trying to wake me up. And I've given several examples in the blog post, but just a couple of quick ones. There was an occasion where I was having a so-called false awakening dream, where the dream setting is exactly like our bedroom, and I thought I had woken up in our regular waking reality bedroom. And Shadow is there nibbling at my arm, which is something he will sometimes do in waking reality. He'll playfully, when he wants my attention, he'll come up to me and give me a little, bite on the leg or on the arm. But then I woke up from that, and then I realized that was a false awakening, and Shadow was actually in the garage. I had another one where Shadow was taking the form of a black bear, and that sounds a little bit weird, but of course dreams are weird. And so I'm sitting on the sofa, and there's this black bear there, but the bear is like a pet, and he's got black fur just like Shadow, and he starts to playfully bite me in the same way Shadow playfully bites me, except he's much bigger, and I'm frightened of this bear is biting me, and so I wake up from that one. And in another one, Shadow appeared in a yoga studio, and I thought while I was dreaming, yeah, it's strange that Shadow's here in the yoga studio. And that what was even stranger is that he started to speak in like a muffled human voice, like he was trying to get my attention. And these are just a few examples, and I've had really probably a dozen more of them, where my dream state is interrupted and I'm woken up by Shadow. And I've come to believe that what's going on is that he's in the garage, he wants to get out of the garage, and he's somehow figured a way to enter my dream state. Now that may seem like a crazy idea, especially if you haven't had any direct experience with this. But I want to visit the idea of the totem animal, the idea that cats are an example of a animal spirit guide or a totem animal, and what does that idea represent for cats? And cats can represent a lot of different things. They can represent playfulness, they can represent being nocturnal, they can represent lunar energy, or some would say feminine energy or yin energy. They can represent laziness. But what I focus on when I think of cats is the idea that cats do not respect ordinary boundaries. If you try to fence in a cat, good luck, because they can scale the fence, or they can easily slip through a broken, fence panel, and they will wander wherever they want to wander. And so there's an analogy here for people that practice lucid dreaming or that just do general dream work, in that cats are very good at manipulating their consciousness, and they can very easily slip through boundaries that seem impenetrable to normal people. And I'm suggesting here that the garage door, when it's locked and Shadow's in the garage, is just like the fence in my backyard. He knows how to use his consciousness to slip through it. And I actually had another dream that sort of actually gave me a visual of what this looked like. And in the dream, Shadow was actually in the front yard of our house, and there was a mail slot at the bottom of our front door. And I thought, well, that's unusual because we don't have a mail slot in our front door in waking reality. But then I watched Shadow somehow slide his body through the mail slot into the house, like he was just letting himself in the house. And then I woke up from the dream. And I thought it was, when I later analyzed it, I thought it was being presented to me as an analogy for the idea of dream telepathy, that an animal like a cat is very adept at sliding through different dimensions of reality. And probably the most classic example of this we have from popular culture and literature is the Cheshire Cat from Alice in Wonderland. And in probably one of the more famous scenes of the Cheshire Cat in the book, he's up in a tree, and Alice is looking at him, and he starts to disappear. He starts to shift out of the universe that Alice is in and into some other dimension. And the only thing he leaves behind is an image of his grinning face. And this really puzzles Alice in the book. And I've got the full quote on my blog post if you want to read it. So, so I think that's getting at. I think the Cheshire Cat is getting at what the totem meaning is of a cat in terms of a larger, symbolic meaning. I had another dream about a cat. This wasn't in particular Shadow. It was about a cat that was in the backyard of a house, and it was an unusual dream setting. There were rows of houses back to back, but in between the two rows of houses were a bunch of wires, or almost like clotheslines, that were connecting, but there was a whole network of them. There were probably 20 or 30 of these lines crossing between these houses, and these lines crossed over a valley that was between the houses, so it was a pretty steep drop if you fell off these clotheslines. And I see a cat that scampers out to the middle of one of the clotheslines, and there's a teddy bear that's like clipped to the clothesline, and he starts playfully batting the teddy bear. He's sort of running back and forth on the clothesline, and then he runs back to the house. And when I woke up and I analyzed that dream, I thought that the meaning was actually related to practicing lucid dreams and other shifts in consciousness. And since I already knew that cats were very adept at shifting their consciousness, I took it as a symbol of that idea. And the cat in this dream is showing me that the idea of being fearless and the idea of being very playful are perhaps at the core of their ability to shift dimensions. So that's a tip for lucid dreamers, is to make sure you don't get too serious about it, that you get into a state of allowing and playfulness and having fun with it, because lucid dreaming, I find, is much more about that allowing energy than it is about, going through a checklist and applying a lot of male energy, sort of like get it done, get it done. So, so that was an interesting dream. And I've also had some interesting experiences in the hypnagogic state, and in the literature people also refer to the hypnopompic state, and these are two very related states of consciousness. These are shifts between waking and sleeping, or sleeping and waking. And I have a lot of journal entries over the years about my experiences, which are very unusual in that state. So these are related to the idea of false awakenings, especially the hypnopompic state, when you're coming in the morning or you're coming out of sleep consciousness. And I found that I was having what felt like a hypnagogic, hypnopompic experience, but it also had some dream qualities. And I'm in my room. Again, it's sort of like a replica of my waking reality bedroom. And Shadow, at this time in waking reality, was taking a nap on my belly. And I was sort of napping and drifting in and out of sleep. And I had an unusual experience where although Shadow was on my belly the whole time, I saw him at a couple different places in the room. And then I had seen my iPhone in like 3 different places shifting around. And then at one point there was like a book on my belly. And it was as if I was like just sort of like very quickly shifting between these sort of alternate parallel scenarios of my bedroom, like as if there were various versions of my bedroom. And I was perceiving different versions of them. And so Shadow's presence as part of that experience to me was interesting and notable. And I think it's not a coincidence. I want to talk a little bit about the idea of animal communication. And I've had actually I've never had the opportunity to meet with an animal communicator, but I have had several dreams where I've experienced some sort of animal communication myself from Shadow. So in one of these dreams, Shadow was going into his food bowl. Actually, it was his water bowl, is what I want to talk about. And the water bowl is larger than usual, and he sits in the water bowl rather than drinking from it. But then he dunks his head underneath the water, and he's licking the bottom of the bowl. And then in this dream scene, I'm scrubbing the crud off the bottom of the water bowl. And later I realized that the dream was sort of a message from Shadow that, his bowl is disgusting, And there were actually a couple of these dreams related to his food bowls that I had that seemed to be a message from him saying, hey, how about a little bit of attention, a little bit of help with my food sanitary situation. So, and I've got a few more examples if you want to read the full blog post. And finally, the last thing I wanted to chat about briefly in this video post is the idea of what I call dream yoga on my website. And dream yoga is the idea of looking at your waking life as symbolic in many respects. Like things you see, people you interact with, animals, people, can be symbolic reflections for you. And I had a very interesting example of this that I later understood better. I had a dream where Shadow was in it, and I was tossing him chocolate-covered espresso beans. And it was funny in the dream, but it didn't really make any sense of it initially. And later, I was sort of in the process of overcoming some health issues, and I was dealing with a lot of congestion in my chest and congestion in my sinuses. And I came to discover, actually through my dreams and also through some sound advice I was getting from some health professionals, that my diet was probably the major contributor to my health problems. And in particular, in my case, consumption of a lot of acid-forming foods, or overconsumption of them. And so I made some adjustments to my diet. And then when I thought about this dream, and when I made those adjustments, my congestion issues, definitely reduced significantly. And when I thought about this dream, I realized at the same time that dream happened, Shadow was constantly throwing up all over the house. We had this problem for like a couple of years, a year and a half. And whenever he would throw up, there would always be a big piece of grass in his throw up. And I was always like, stupid cat, why are you eating food that you can't digest? And I've only recently come to understand the meaning of that dream because I was feeding Shadow chocolate-covered espresso beans. And, that was basically a message for me, not for Shadow. It wasn't about Shadow's diet, eating grass. It was about my diet, because the chocolate-covered espresso bean is probably the single most acidic food you could eat, or acid-forming food you could eat. And back then, I was consuming not only them, but I was eating tons of, my level of coffee, alcohol, and other major acid-forming items were, it was just out of balance for what my body needed. So that was interesting how in waking reality, Shadow was reflecting something to me when he was throwing up and not able to digest, saying, hey, Chris, this is also going on in your life. And then I was given a dream that sort of created that juxtaposition with me feeding Shadow a snack that he couldn't eat, he would never eat, a chocolate-covered espresso bean. So got more on that in the blog post. So that's going to be it for now. I hope you enjoyed this little video. To keep up with future installments of my video blog, please consider subscribing to my YouTube channel. And you can also, if you prefer the written version of my blog, you can subscribe on my website, lucidcoaching.com. And we've also got some social media options on there if you prefer to keep up with information on Facebook or Twitter. Thanks again.